The U.S. and China moving closer to a full tariff and trade deal, announcing a framework last week. Joining us right now to talk about what could be next, Nicholas Burns, who served as U.S. ambassador to China under the Biden administration, has worked under 6 presidents, both Democrats and Republicans, in his decade-long career. He's now professor at Harvard University's Belfer Center, and we welcome him to the broadcast. How close do you really think we are at this point? I know we keep saying we're getting closer and closer. We haven't had the real news yet, but it does feel like something's there.
Andrew, I think the agreement announced last week on rare earth metals and rare earth exports by China to the U.S., it's positive. It's a real step in the right direction. However, I don't think that the two sides are close to a comprehensive trade deal. I think we're looking at more of a truce. You know, they've had difficulty, particularly on the rare earth metal. Both leaders are determined not to back down, and it's certainly understandable from a political perspective. But I would say there's probably a month or 2 or 3 left in these negotiations if you're looking at a comprehensive trade deal, right, perhaps in the autumn, because I do think both leaders want to meet, and they probably won't be able to meet until they can get a trade deal.
So one of the things we heard from President Trump just over the weekend was the prospect of a deal over TikTok. He suggests almost in the next 2 weeks, possibly with a group of wealthy investors. I would have thought that that was one chess piece in this larger trade tariff arrangement with China. Do you think that's something that could happen before a larger trade deal is accomplished?
I would think, because the Chinese will have a say in this, in the way that they react to it. So I think this would be certainly in the margins of what this whole entire deal will look like in the future. But, one thing that's clear to me, the Chinese need a trade deal. I mean, they're talking tough now, but they've been a major disruptor in global trade, as you know. Their economy is moving along, but not at high single-digit rates. They're going to be looking at, I think, 3 or 4% GDP growth over the next year. They won't say that. They'll say it's 5%. It'll be less. They need the foreign direct investment, which declined precipitously last year. And I think the Chinese need stability in their relationship with the United States. We're their biggest export market. So both sides need the deal, but I think the Chinese probably at this point are going to try to move this along.
Okay, but what does that mean ultimately to the rate, the tariff rate? And I'll tell you, most CEOs I talk to say there's a big difference between 30% and 20%. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a wide delta. Where do you think we land, and what kind of leverage do we have with the Chinese, and what could they offer to shift the balance of that?
Well, you have 2 issues here. You have the overall tariff rates, but you also have the sectoral tariff rates. So, for instance, the United States right now has 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, 50% on semiconductors, 25% on lithium batteries. Those were set by President Biden 13 months ago. And it's interesting how President Biden honored all of President Trump's tariffs, and President Trump is honoring President Biden's tariffs. So there's 2 problems in this trade deal. One is the reciprocal rate that the administration, I think, will insist on. But second is the sectoral tariffs. I don't see those going away, given the fact that China is trying to dump its excess manufactured products like lithium batteries or EVs or solar panels on the rest of the world.
I have a larger question. I was talking to an auto CEO last week who said to me, look, BYD is just killing it. And they may never take the U.S., given the kind of tariffs we have on them. But they're going to take Europe. They're going to take the rest of the world at the rate that they're going. If you were President Trump thinking about that, what would you be doing?
Trying to align better with the Europeans and with the Japanese and with the South Koreans. Look, I understand. I have supported a lot of what President Trump has done on tariffs vis-a-vis China, because we need to be tough-minded, and President Trump's been appropriately tough. The problem, I think, for us tactically is that we've also put high tariffs on all of our leading trade partners. And I know from my time in China that the Japanese, the Koreans, the Europeans, the Canadians all have the same problems on trade with China as we do. But we've taken away from the incentive of those countries joining our side of the table, leaning on the Chinese, providing that weight. If you think about Japan, the EU, and the United States alone, that's 60% of global GDP. So I think that we've done this in too unilateral a fashion. We have natural allies out there. But if you're going to have tariff wars with them, little incentive for them to join our side in the China talks.
Ambassador, President Trump. I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
I was just going to say, Andrew said, what's the advice to President Trump, or what
Right.
would I do? I think that's the major advice. We need more leverage on our side of the table, and it's there for the taking if we would make China the centerpiece of this,
Right.
the focal
But how
point of our.
concerned are you, by the way, when I talk to the folks in the auto industry, they say, look, BYD are making better cars than we're making. I mean, that's a very interesting, and then you get into the whole idea, and they're cheaper. And so the question is, how do you actually create an environment where we can compete? And should we be trying to compete?
With great difficulty. And I think that's why you've seen, the Europeans have put tariffs on Chinese EVs. And it's going to be interesting to see what the Japanese and Koreans have to do, because everyone's losing market share. You've seen that, particularly with the Japanese, who've been a major player in China on automobiles for the last couple of decades.
President Trump says that he has a group of wealthy people ready to buy TikTok. He says he can reveal who they are in a couple of weeks, but the Chinese probably have to sign off on this deal to begin with. What are the odds of that? And is something that seems as small as this something that could actually be part of these trade talks?
I think inevitably TikTok's going to have to be part of the trade deal, or certainly on the margins related to the trade deal. The Chinese government's going to have a say on this. They've played hardball over the last year and a half, as various proposals have been made. But ultimately, the Chinese do want to deal with the United States. So I think that President Trump would be well advised, and I'm sure he's thinking about this, and his team, make this part and parcel of the overall talks that are underway.
If this is part of what we get, though, what are we giving up as a result? Is TikTok really that important for us to keep?
Well, I think one of the interesting questions here is, what are we giving up? The Chinese actually announced last week specifically what they're going to do on this rare earths deal. They alluded to the fact that the United States will now reduce or drop some of our technology restrictions. And I think the devil's going to be in the detail. The U.S. has not announced what it's going to do on that point, and certainly not on TikTok yet either.